Welcome back, my loves. Today's story is about Avery, a woman who spent years building herself into something sharp, strategic, and untouchable. She had a plan, a mission, and an enemy she was absolutely certain she hated. That enemy was Celeste Voss, her CEO, her rival, and the woman who, in the span of one unexpected week, in a house on the California coast, would quietly take everything Avery thought she knew about herself and rearrange it without asking permission. This is a story full of tension you can taste, silences that mean more than conversations, and the terrifying moment when you realize that the person you came to destroy is the only one who's ever really seen you. Stay with me until the end. I promise it's worth it. I didn't go to Carmel to fall in love. I went to win. That's the only honest way to start this, with the truth of what I was when I arrived. I was not soft. I was not open. I was not someone who stood at the edge of the Pacific at 6 a.m. and let the cold air do anything to her, except remind her to stay focused. I had a plan. I had always had a plan, and for the first time in 4 years of working under Celeste Voss, the plan was finally close enough to touch. I had married her for the company. Or, more precisely, I had married her because the company's board required it of both of us, in the most absurd and archaic clause I had ever seen in a corporate contract, and neither of us had been willing to walk away from the merger. It was a technicality, a performance, a strategic inconvenience that we had agreed, with barely concealed mutual contempt, to endure for exactly 1 fiscal quarter. 1 quarter, 13 weeks, and then we'd divorce, split the equity, and go back to being what we actually were to each other, enemies in expensive shoes. The Carmel house was her idea, a retreat, she called it, a way to make the marriage look credible to the board while we each worked on our separate agendas in the same space. She had a guest wing, I had the east-facing room, with the window that looked out over the cypress trees. We had an unspoken agreement to stay on our respective sides of the house and pretend, when it was necessary, that we didn't find each other exhausting. That was the plan. I arrived on a Tuesday. She was already there. Let me tell you what I knew about Celeste Voss before that week. I knew she was brilliant in a way that made me want to argue with everything she said, just so I wouldn't have to admit she was right. I knew she had restructured 3 companies before 35, and never once lost sleep over the decisions she made. Or if she did, she never let it show. I knew she walked into a room and immediately became the temperature of it. I knew she dressed like someone who had decided a long time ago that she was not going to make herself smaller for anyone. I also knew she had blocked 2 of my promotions, that she had looked at my proposal for the Pacific Division expansion and called it, in front of the entire executive team, ambitious in theory, naive in practice. I knew that her voice had a specific frequency when she was dismissing something I'd said, a flattening of tone that I could hear in my sleep, and that I had spent the better part of 3 years trying to produce work so undeniable that she couldn't use that voice on me ever again. That was my relationship with Celeste Voss. We were not friends. We were not colleagues who respected each other warmly. We were 2 people who had been locked into the same orbit by circumstance and ambition, and who had decided, separately and without ever discussing it, that the only acceptable outcome was to outmaneuver the other. The marriage had not changed that. The ceremony had been clinical, a courthouse, a contract, 2 witnesses who worked for the company's legal team and who had the good sense not to make eye contact with either of us during the signing. Celeste had worn a cream blouse and dark trousers and looked like she was closing a real estate deal. I had worn a navy blazer and felt, the entire time, like I was signing something I would spend years trying to get out of. We had shaken hands after, not kissed, not embraced. Shaken hands, like the professionals we were, and then gone back to our separate cars. So when I pulled up to the Carmel house that Tuesday afternoon and saw her standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at the ocean like she owned it, which, technically, she did, I felt nothing that resembled warmth. I felt the familiar sharpening of every instinct I had. She turned when she heard the car. Her expression didn't change. "You're late," she said. "I'm exactly on time," I said. "You just got here early." She looked at me for 1 second longer than was necessary, then went back inside without holding the door. I picked up my bag and told myself this was going to be fine. I had been wrong about things before, but rarely this spectacularly. The house was not what I expected. I had prepared myself for something cold, all glass and steel, and the kind of interior design that signals wealth without suggesting that anyone actually lives there. But it was warm in a way that caught me off guard. Bookshelves everywhere, a kitchen with an actual wooden table, scratched from use, a living room that had clearly been arranged by someone who intended to spend real time in it, not someone who wanted it to photograph well. There were plants. There were stacks of things on the coffee table, not decorative stacks, actual reading stacks, with different books open at different angles. I stood in the entryway with my bag and didn't say anything for a moment. "Your room is down the east hall," Celeste said from the kitchen, not looking up from whatever she was reading at the counter. "There are towels in the closet. Dinner is at 7 if you want it, but I'm not cooking for 2, so you'll need to let me know before 5. "I'll cook," I said. She looked up then. Just for a second, something crossed her face that I couldn't read. "Fine," she said, and went back to reading. That was day 1. I told myself the warmth of the house meant nothing, that the bookshelves meant nothing, that the way she had said fine with something almost like surprise in it, that meant nothing either. I was very good at telling myself things meant nothing. I had been doing it for years. The thing about being trapped in a house with someone you've spent years categorizing is that the categories start to come apart in small, inconvenient ways. It started with the mornings. I woke early, I always do, and on the second day, I came out to the kitchen at 6 and found her already there. She was standing at the window with coffee, still in what I realized were pajamas, looking out at the fog that was sitting low over the water. She hadn't heard me, and for a moment, I saw her in a way I had never been given the chance to see her before. Not Celeste Voss, the CEO, just her. Her hair was loose. That was the first thing. I had never seen her with her hair loose. She wore it up, always, in ways that suggested deliberate control. But here, it was just falling around her shoulders, and she wasn't doing anything about it. Wasn't performing anything for anyone. And she looked. I remember my brain doing something clumsy, reaching for the word, and then putting it down, and picking up a different one. Tired, I told myself. She looks tired. She heard me eventually and turned, and the moment passed. She handed me a mug from the counter without being asked. She had made enough for 2, which I registered and filed away as a data point I hadn't asked for, and said something about the fog burning off by 9. "I'm going to walk the beach before it does," she said. "The fog makes it better." "Better how?" I said. She considered this. "Quieter," she said. "Like the world doesn't know you're there yet." I didn't respond to that. I didn't know what to do with a version of Celeste Voss who said things like that. She left to change, and I stood in the kitchen with my coffee and felt something small and uncomfortable settle in my chest. It took me 3 more days to admit that I was going with her on those walks. Not because I wanted to, or that's what I told myself. I went because it was exercise, because the beach was there, and I was a person who ran in the mornings, and the sand was a reasonable substitute. Not because I noticed, on day 2, that she walked at exactly the pace I needed to keep up with. and that she didn't try to fill the silence with small talk, and that once, when I slipped on a wet rock, her hand came out and caught my elbow before I'd even registered that I was falling. "Careful," she said, and let go immediately, as if it hadn't happened. I thought about that for longer than I should have. By day 4, I had started doing something that alarmed me. I had started paying attention to the details of her that I had always filed under irrelevant. The way she laughed when she was actually amused. Not the professional laugh, but the real one, surprised out of her, which I discovered when I made a comment at dinner about the absurdity of the merger clause, and she looked up from her plate, and that laugh just came out of her. Short, genuine, unguarded. I said something else funny on purpose, and immediately hated myself for it. The way she read, completely absorbed, like nothing else existed, with one foot tucked under her on the couch, and the book held close, like she was trying to climb into it. The way she talked about the company when she wasn't being strategic about it. One night on the porch, after a bottle of wine that was maybe a glass too much for honesty, she said, "I know what they say about me, that I don't care about the people, only the numbers." She was looking at the water. "I care about the people. I just don't know how to make that legible." I sat with that for a long time before I said anything. "You blocked my promotion," I said. "Twice." "I know," she said. "Why?" She turned to look at me then, and the light from the house was behind her, so I couldn't read her expression entirely, just the shape of it. "Because you were good," she said. "And the role I was blocking you from would have wasted you. The one I needed you for didn't exist yet." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what my face was doing. "I know that wasn't my decision to make," she said. "I should have told you." The wind came off the water. I heard the cypress trees move. I had carried those 2 blocked promotions like evidence for years, like proof of something I needed to be angry about, and she had just taken them out of my hands, so calmly, so honestly, that I didn't know where to put the anger anymore. I went to bed before she did, and lay there in the dark, and tried to reconstruct the architecture of everything I had decided about her. It was harder than it should have been. There is a specific kind of torture in realizing that someone is not who you needed them to be. I had built a very clean life around knowing exactly what Celeste Voss was. She was the obstacle. She was the opponent. She was the person whose approval I'd sought and been denied, and whose opinions I'd decided didn't matter anyway, in the recursive way of someone who cares deeply about something they refuse to admit they care about. She was, in the careful architecture of my interior life, the answer to the question of why I kept pushing. Because she was ahead of me, and I needed to be where she was, and someday I would be, and then I would know I was enough. That was the story I had told myself for 3 years. And Carmel was dismantling it one fog walk at a time. It was day 6 when it happened. The thing I couldn't put into the category of nothing. We had been sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. She had a contract spread out, and I had my laptop, and we had been working in silence for almost an hour, which had become, without either of us naming it, comfortable. It was raining. The windows were dark and blurred, and the house felt very enclosed, very separate from the rest of the world. She made a sound. Not words, just a small, frustrated exhale, and pushed the contract away from her, and pressed her fingers against her eyes. "What?" I said. "The Halverson clause," she said. "It's designed to trap us both, and the legal team keeps telling me it's fine. Let me see it." She looked at me, hesitated. I reached across the table and took the contract. I read the relevant section, read it again. "This isn't designed to trap you," I said. "It's designed to look like it's protecting you while actually limiting your exit options. There's a difference." She was watching me. "The exit window is in subsection 4, I said. "They buried it. You file within the first 30 days of the second quarter, and the restriction dissolves. It's intentional obscurement, not a trap. She was quiet for a moment. How did you find that in 40 seconds? She said. I read contracts the same way you read rooms, I said. Fast and for the thing they're not showing you. Something happened in her expression. Something that moved beneath the surface of it. Like a current I could see the effect of, but not the source. Avery, she said. Just my name. Nothing after it. And I don't know how to explain what that did to me. My name in her voice with no suffix, no context, no strategic framing around it. Just my name like it meant something specific to her. Like she had been thinking about what to do with it, and had decided to just say it. I looked back down at the contract. You should call Marcus in the morning, I said. He'll try to tell you it's more complicated than it is. It isn't. She didn't push. She let me redirect. But when I finally looked up, she was still watching me, and her expression had a quality I couldn't name. Careful, and not unkind, and like she knew exactly what I had just done. I went to bed an hour later and couldn't sleep for 4 hours. Because the thing I had refused to look at directly was now sitting in the center of my chest and refusing to move. I was not angry at her anymore. I hadn't been angry at her in days. What I felt when she was in the room was not anger. It was the opposite of anger. It was a pulling toward, a heightening, an awareness of every specific detail of her presence, like my entire nervous system had decided she was the most important thing in the room and started cataloging her without asking me. The way she moved around the kitchen like she had mapped it in her sleep. The way she argued. Not to win, I'd realized, but to find out where the truth was. The way she had said my name. I lay in the dark and told myself this was proximity. This was the house and the isolation and the forced intimacy of a situation I hadn't chosen. This was not real. This was a temporary aberration produced by circumstance, and I was going to walk out of it in 1 week and back into my actual life, and none of this was going to matter. I said that to myself several times. It didn't help. Day 7 was the rain day. The full-day rain, gray and constant, that made leaving the house feel impossible. We both worked from the living room. We made lunch together without discussing it, moving around each other in the kitchen like we had some choreography no one had taught us. She put on music, low, something I didn't know, and I didn't ask her to change it. By afternoon, the rain had gotten heavier, and she brought 2 blankets from the hall closet and handed me one without comment and went back to the couch. I held the blanket for a moment before putting it around my shoulders. This was the thing I had not said, that I could not figure out who I was in this house with her. I had been Avery who knew exactly what she was doing for so long that I didn't have vocabulary for the version of myself that kept making her laugh on purpose and waking up early enough to be in the kitchen when she came down and finding reasons to stay in whatever room she was in. I hadn't said any of that. What I had said was this: fine, and yes, and I'll cook, and let me see the contract. The language of proximity without declaration. The vocabulary of someone inching toward something they haven't admitted they want. That evening, she found me on the porch in the rain. I had gone out without thinking, just needed air, needed to stand somewhere the walls weren't so close, and the rain had been lighter then. By the time she appeared in the doorway, it had picked up again, and I was damp, and not entirely sure how long I'd been standing there. "You're getting rained on," she said. "I know." She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she came out and stood next to me, without an umbrella, without a jacket, just standing there with me. In the rain like that was a normal thing to do. "Why did you come out here?" I said. Not a question, exactly. "Why did you?" she said. I didn't answer. She didn't push. We stood there for maybe 2 minutes. The rain was cold. I could feel the warmth of her standing that close. That specific warmth. The kind that wasn't the temperature, but something else. Something I had stopped trying to categorize honestly, because every honest category led somewhere I wasn't ready to look. Then she turned slightly, and I turned slightly, and we were looking at each other. Really looking. Not the way we looked at each other in meetings, where we were both performing something. Just looking. She lifted her hand and moved a piece of my hair back from where the rain had pushed it across my face. Her fingertips touched my cheekbone, just barely, and then her hand came back down. Neither of us said anything. I felt that touch for the rest of the night, in my shoulder blades, somehow, in the back of my throat. I did not sleep at all. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it's because this story reached something you recognize. That specific feeling of knowing you want something and being completely unable to say it out loud. So go ahead and click like right now. It helps me keep bringing stories like this one to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the bell so YouTube lets you know when a new story goes up. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where you were so sure about how you felt about someone, and then everything you thought you knew about them started changing, and you couldn't stop it? Have you ever hated someone first? Tell me. I read every single one. And tell me what city you're watching from. I'll leave you a heart. Now, back to our story. Day 8. Last full day. I had known it was coming. I had been counting the days in both directions, the ones that were gone and the ones that were left, with a doubleness that I didn't want to examine. Part of me had been counting down with the logic I'd arrived with. One more day and this was over. One more day and I could go back to being the version of myself that had a plan, that was strategic, that knew exactly what she wanted, and was not confused by rain and blankets and the specific way someone said her name in a quiet kitchen. The other part of me had been counting in the opposite direction, dreading. I woke at 5 and went out to the beach before the fog burned off and tried to think clearly. It didn't work. Clear thinking had become very difficult. What I kept coming back to was this. I was leaving tomorrow. We would drive back. We would re-enter the company's ecosystem. The board would take their photographs and make their announcements, and the merger would proceed, and then in 3 months we would sit down with 2 sets of lawyers and divide everything that needed dividing, and Celeste Voss and I would go back to being what we had always been. And I would never be in this house again. I would never make dinner in that kitchen again, or walk that beach, or sit on that porch in the rain next to someone who stood in the cold without a jacket, just because I was standing in the cold. I turned around and went back. She was in the kitchen. She looked up when I came through the door, sand on my shoes, jacket still damp from the morning air, and there was something in her face that I had started to be able to read, a guardedness that wasn't coldness, the expression of someone who was also counting. "You're back early," she said. "Couldn't focus," I said. "On what?" I looked at her. "On not thinking about tomorrow." Something shifted in her face, just slightly. She set down her coffee mug. "Avery." "Don't," I said, because I knew. I knew the shape of what was coming, the reasonable and careful framing of it. We had a professional context, a contractual arrangement, a situation that was already complicated and would become more so if either of us made it more complicated. I knew all the sentences. I had been writing them in my head for days. "I wasn't going to say that," she said. I looked at her. "I was going to say that I know what this week has been. For me." She was very steady. Her voice didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything or say anything you don't want to say. I want you to know that it was real for me. Whatever it was real. The fog was starting to burn off through the window behind her. I could see it lifting. I had spent years being precise, being strategic, knowing exactly what I was doing with every sentence I produced. And standing there in that kitchen with the Pacific going through its morning change behind her, all the precision drained out of me, and what was left was just the thing I had been carrying all week. I came here to get leverage, I said. That's the truth. I had a plan. I was going to find something I could use. She didn't flinch. I know, she said. I had the same plan. Something about hearing her say that, calm and honest, and with no theater around it, made something release in my chest. I don't have the plan anymore, I said. Neither do I, she said. We looked at each other across that kitchen for a long moment. The house was quiet. The fog outside was lifting, revealing the water one slow layer at a time. I crossed the kitchen. I wasn't sure what I was going to do until I was in front of her, close enough to feel the warmth of her again, and then I just stopped. Because I didn't have a next sentence. I had run out of language. She looked at me, really looked, the same way she had on the porch in the rain, and raised her hand, and very slowly, very deliberately, took mine. Just my hand, her fingers around mine, nothing more. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like finally breathing correctly after years of doing it slightly wrong, that I was not here to win anymore. I had stopped wanting to win somewhere between day 3 and that laugh she hadn't been able to help, and I hadn't let myself say it until now. We stayed like that for a while, her hand around mine, the fog continuing to lift outside. I thought about the version of myself who had driven up here with a plan. She seemed very far away. We drove back on a Thursday. She drove, and I sat in the passenger seat, and we talked about nothing. A podcast she was listening to, the route, the weather changing back toward the city, and it was the easiest conversation I'd had with her, which was also the hardest, because I knew what it was. It was the last thing before the other thing. The company would need us to perform the marriage for another week. There would be photographs. There would be a dinner with the board. And then, quietly, the paperwork would begin. And we would divide what needed to be divided. And the people who had required this of us would get their merger and never know what had happened in a house in Carmel with bookshelves everywhere and a kitchen with a scratched wooden table. She parked in front of my building. Neither of us moved. I need to say something before you go up, she said. Okay, I said. She turned in her seat to face me. Her expression was the careful one, not closed, just careful, like she was choosing each word with real intention. I think what happened this week is real, she said. I'm not going to spend the next 3 months pretending I don't know what I know about you now. I don't want to do that. She paused. But I also think you came here, carrying something you didn't choose, and I don't want you to feel like I'm... She stopped, looked at her hands briefly. I don't want to be another thing that happened to you. I want to be something you chose. I looked at her for a long time. I know the difference, I said, between things that happened to me and things I chose. I know you do, she said. I just wanted you to have the space to be sure. I opened the car door, stopped. There was something I'd been holding since the kitchen that morning, since the fog lifting, since her hand around mine. I'd been carrying it the whole drive back, and I knew, if I didn't put it down now, carefully, I would carry it differently. Wrong. I turned back. The Pacific Division proposal, I said. The one you called naive in practice. She looked at me steadily. You were right, I said. I knew you were right when you said it. I just wasn't ready to hear it from you. I paused. I'm working on that. Something in her expression shifted, softened in a way that wasn't weakness. It was relief. I know, she said. I watched you work on it all week. I got out of the car. I stood on the sidewalk and she rolled the window down. We looked at each other, the city around us again, the noise, the ordinary Thursday afternoon reestablishing itself over everything. 3 months, I said. 3 months, she said. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact, a calendar, a shape of time that we were both going to have to live inside before we could live inside anything else. She drove away, and I stood there until I couldn't see the car anymore. I went upstairs, made coffee, sat at my desk and opened my laptop and looked at the folder where I kept the documents I had collected over 4 years of watching Celeste Voss. Every decision she'd made that I'd disagreed with, every move I'd catalogued, every piece of the case I'd been building. I sat there for a long time. Then I deleted the folder. Not because I had forgiven everything, not because I had become someone who let go easily. I had never been that person, and I was not going to become her overnight. But because the version of me who had needed that folder had been keeping herself angry on purpose, had been using that anger as scaffolding to avoid something she wasn't ready to know about herself. I didn't need the scaffolding anymore. I was standing on my own feet, finally, differently than I had been before, less armored, more honest, more uncertain in ways that didn't feel like weakness, just real. I opened a new document, Pacific Division Strategy, revised, I typed, and started writing. I used to think that the point of everything was to win. I measured myself by it constantly, by what I'd closed, what I'd outmaneuvered, what I'd proven to the people who had underestimated me. I thought that was just who I was. Avery who wins. Avery who has a plan. But what that week in Carmel gave me was something I hadn't put on the list of things I was going after. It gave me a self I could actually see clearly. A version of me who wasn't performing anything for anyone, who had deleted a 4-year folder on a Thursday evening and started something new because it was the truest thing to do. She didn't cure me of my ambition. I'm still ambitious. I still want the Pacific Division. I still argue in meetings and read contracts fast and make a case for things I believe in. I just know now that the sharpness I've always had was never the point of me. It was just the armor. And I can put it down sometimes, carefully, for the right reasons. Celeste called 4 days later, officially, about a contract issue, and we were professional and precise, and said nothing that wasn't required. And then, at the very end, she said, "The fog is back in Carmel this week." "Is it?" I said. "Apparently it makes it quieter," she said. "Like the world doesn't know you're there yet." I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and felt the specific weight of a future that was still 3 months away, but already had a shape. "I remember," I said. "There are loves that arrive like plans, organized, intentional, controllable. And there are loves that arrive like weather, like fog on the California coast that sits low over the water and changes the light of everything. You can't plan for weather. You can only decide whether to go out in it." If this story stayed with you, write saudade in the comments. That's how I'll know you made it to the end with me. And if you want to keep following these stories, the ones that stay with you after, click the video that's appearing on your screen right now. A huge kiss, and until the next story.